Hello vegans and fellow meat eaters, welcome to another episode of Veganism Debunked. Today we are going to debunk a vague sounding vegan argument which goes like this. Veganism is a moral imperative.
My name's Ed, and as you know, there's a banner on the front of this table and it says veganism is a moral obligation.
So this could mean one of three things. It could mean that veganism is an objective obligation for everyone, or that veganism is a subjective obligation for some subjects, or that veganism is universally accepted as obligatory. The latter is obviously not true, as veganism is not universally accepted, so we are left with two choices, objective or subjective. Most vegans are subjectivists, although we might find a few who don't believe in subjective morals.
Killing animals is absolutely fine because morality is subjective. I don't truly believe that anyone actually thinks that morality is subjective. Deep down, we all have an understanding of a basic moral code, and even though we may be conditioned or indoctrinated into a society or culture that says that some animals are here for us to use and exploit, that doesn't make it moral. Morality is subjective is not a good enough excuse to morally justify taking the life of an animal, as these animals are victims. In fact, morality is subjective is a very dangerous philosophy to have and a very dangerous way to live your life, because these actions that we make do have victims that should be regarded, victims that should be acknowledged, and victims that should be respected.
This vegan really doesn't like subjectivism, and it is understandable why. It allows us meat eaters to determine that eating meat is not morally bad for us. It sounds like he would prefer for it to be objective, because then, by his own objective morals, we would not be allowed to eat meat. But just because the vegan does not like that we think eating meat is fine, does not prove that objective morals are true. When a vegan starts talking like this, simply ask if they have any proof that morals are objective, and see if they can prove it.
What turned you into a vegan?
Well, there was two things that really led me to veganism, and the first was I came across this story about a truck crashing on the way to a slaughterhouse near Manchester, and the truck was carrying about 6,500 chickens. And the journalist had said that hundreds had died from the impact, but there were hundreds more who were suffering. Some were running into oncoming traffic. And I started to feel sympathy for chickens, which I'd never done before. But in my fridge was a KFC because fried chicken was my favorite food when I used to eat animals. And so I was feeling sorry for chickens, but also consuming them and paying for them to go to slaughterhouses to have their life taken from them. So it's a bit of a paradox. So I thought about my values when it came to animals, and I thought about how I viewed my relationship with non-human animals.
So none of what this vegan said proves objective morality. He has no basis for objective morality. At least religious people have something like a divine document from which they derive their morals. But it sounds like this man is speaking just from his subjective perspective. He talks about his feelings and his values, not some kind of objective values. That brings us back to subjectivism, and he gets lectured on it by someone who understands it better than him.
Okay, so first of all, I think it's definitely a choice for people to choose to be vegan or not to choose to be vegan.
Yep.
I feel like it's you can't argue certain morals in it, but I would argue that everyone have their own choice.
And I agree that whether or not we're vegan is absolutely a choice. But I believe that everything that we do is a choice. You know, you sat down, that was a personal choice. Yeah. But at the same time, something more malicious, like a mugging or assaulting someone, that's a choice. Right. So do you think that just because we personally choose to do something, that provides a moral justification for the action?
I feel like there's a line there, right? So depends on the extremity of the event. So say if you are... say up until some point, I feel like everyone has this threshold here where beyond that threshold, there's something that is absolutely morally wrong, right, and you wouldn't choose to do something like that. Yes. But for other things, like currently for me, like choosing to eat meat or not falls into this part of the category rather than the things that go beyond the line. So I guess it really depends on where each people set the threshold. Sure. So I personally are kind of inclined to a moral relativism view, that everyone have the right to choice where to set the line. And I feel like in our current world, most people would set the line in a way that the issue of vegan versus non-vegan will be on this part of it.
And with moral relativism and the idea of like setting our own subjective version of morality, do you think, does that then provide a justification for someone to say be racist or sexist or to harm someone else if their argument would then to be turned around and to say, well, I set my own standard of what's right and wrong. Surely that world would be a world without like a legal system or a judicial system, but that's not the world that we live in.
Right. So I think those are the things that goes beyond my line, and I will call that's morally wrong. And
how do we define what's morally wrong? Because if we go with moral relativism, then morality is subjective.
True.
But then to create distinctions of morally right and wrong means that we don't subscribe to moral relativism, and we subscribe to something more objective.
I guess my view is that everyone have their own decision of what's morally right or wrong. I don't think there's an objective moral that everyone needs to be abide by. So I define something like being sexist or being racist as morally wrong. If other people don't define as that, that's fine. I'm not trying to impose in my view. I can try to convince him or her. But if not, that's fine. I respect his or her decision.
You respect that decision to be racist or sexist?
I respect her freedom to choose. I would not respect her decision, but I would also not trying to push to say that he or she must force to have this belief.
In a moral relativist situation, the moral obligation is going to be relative to the subject. It is true that from the vegan's subjective viewpoint, they might be obligated to be vegan, because that's what they think. But from the meat eater's subjective viewpoint, there is no moral obligation or imperative to be vegan, and we can even pressure the vegan subjectivists to admit that for us there is no obligation because that is what subjectivism entails. Given that from our point there is no moral obligation to go vegan, the argument is debunked.